want to say thank you all for taking the time here with me to speak with me because as I'm sure if you guys saw the email, I've actually met almost 20 years ago in November out in Virginia. So that's where I'm originally from. So I'm out here in North Carolina now. So I don't know if you guys remember the details there, but it was one of those situations where I was with my sister at the theaters and we were in Ballston Common Mall and we were intending on seeing a movie. It was going to be the Santa Claus 2 because she wanted to see the film. And she knew that I was a very, very big movie guy. Like that's what I love. And when I saw, I remember Ursula was there because the reason I remember you, Ursula, is because you were one of the main actresses in Manna From Heaven.
Yeah.
And I believe I also saw Maria there too. I can't remember who was there, but I remember Ursula specifically in the beginning. So having seen you guys were there, I can't remember if I went up to you guys and said, "Are you guys premiering a movie here or something to that degree?" And I think one of you said yes, we're playing right now. I said perfect. So I went to my sister and said, can we just watch this movie, because I don't think we'll ever get an opportunity to watch a film while the filmmakers are here. And she's like, yeah, if you want to do so. So she was gracious enough to give me the opportunity to return the tickets, buy the tickets to your showing. We went, saw the film, and then you guys had come out and started answering some questions. I was very nervous at the time, so I held off to my question until I saw I believe all five of you were out there, if I recall correctly. I remember speaking with the three of you. I know Maria, Ursula for short, and I believe Gabrielle, if I remember correctly. But it's kind of vague at this very point here. But the thing that I wanted to bring up here, the reason why I'm bringing this up here is because, I was already starting to come to a point where I was appreciating a lot of the finer details in films. But this was actually the very first time where I actually met a group of filmmakers that were promoting a movie, basically being there in the public eye and talking with the people and answering the questions. And it was something I'd never experienced before. So to start getting out some information for you guys and getting the finer details, like the one thing I remember, Ursula, I'm sure you don't remember, but I had asked you because at the time I wanted to be an actor. I don't want to be one now, but at the time I did. But I'd asked what you do to prepare to learn your lines. And the one thing that I remember that literally changed my perspective on preparation for not just for acting, but just for production in general, was that you had said that I had record all the lines. I played on a cassette tape in the car, and I'm on my way to the set. And then by that point, I had the lines that I recorded with the other actors, read that back to myself, and then I repeat my lines back to them. So that's how I prepare, because we don't have any time to really rehearse, especially with this short, small budget we had, the short schedule we had. We just have to make it work, as quickly as possible and as thoroughly as possible. When I heard that changed everything for me about how I looked at films in general. So having that experience, there was a lot more that I started delving into when it came to film. So I became more aware of the production side of it as well, too, the history. So from that conversation, a lot had changed for me. So I want to say thank you guys for that, because I don't think I ever actually gave really said thank you, other than just saying thank you for answering my questions, but more like to thank you for being more or less a catalyst that changed my perception of how to look at films in general. So then since that conversation, everything that I've looked at when it came to film had become more about the finer details of how the actor prepared. And when an actor comes on one film, how come they've done it better in that production that they didn't do well in this one here? So, and then when you listen to the interviews and you hear the behind the scenes stories, you come to find out that there was some trouble in their personal lives and some things had affected this and that. And I'm like, oh, now it makes more sense. So then I start paying attention to those little details more often now. I think more so than, because with the channel I work with here, everyone does reviews, but I think the biggest difference with me is that I point out just literally the little details that I think comes out the most for me, that stick out for me when it comes to performances, directing, and so on. So I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but I was hoping that we could pretty much kind of pick up where we last left off here, because I actually have been following with you guys for on and off throughout the years. I actually have come across a few of your films as well that I have come across as well throughout the years that I have picked up on, and I was happy to see that you guys were still making films. And I even came across on your YouTube channel the short episodes that you have done with your father that I actually thought were really funny, where all of you guys were definitely involved and were giving the spotlight to your father and using his age as a way to tell the story, but not poking fun at him directly, but poking fun at the situation of people's ignorance and things of that nature. So I've noticed that the things that I've noticed from Manna from Heaven were still very much prevalent in your form of storytelling that I still carry on throughout the years that I have picked up since, when we last have left off. And then in the email, you guys have replied back to me that I believe Manna from Heaven, if I recall correctly, was being transferred to 4K, if I remember correctly. So, I'm trying to see what's the best way we can start us here, but I was hoping you guys could either one, if you remember the conversation from that evening, and secondly, how has how you guys have felt that you guys have progressed as storytellers along the way. Maybe kind of a generic question asked, but quite frankly, I'm trying to consolidate what I want to focus on first. So I hope you don't mind this array of questions I'm asking right now.
I love it. And first of all, thank you for reaching out. I think it is so cool that we're continuing this conversation, whatever, 20 years later, and that we all still have the passion for film. And when you talk about our being there, that was such a great experience for us because that was the third feature that we'd done. And it was the first time that we were out traveling. I mean, we did film festivals before, but to travel with the actual distribution and to understand the business of distribution and what went into it. And we ended up having support from the AMC movie theaters because they saw that we were doing very well with word of mouth. And so the CEO came to see it and he really liked the movie. And so he got behind it, which turned out just to be such a blessing because big studios have whole departments of people who are there making sure they're getting their posters placed and their trailers played. And so we would never have gotten any of that if we didn't have that support. And yet still, it was so much work. And then a joy to get to talk to the audiences and experience that. So I'll stop talking and throw it to one of my sisters.
I love that. And I just want to add, I mean, I think even bigger picture, just this idea that I think translates for many things. And a number of us also are teachers now in various capacities. And I love this idea that, you have one conversation with someone and you never know where that will take that person, right? That these kinds of perspectives, when you see people with different perspectives, it can open up other parts of our lives and other ways of thinking. And I just love that story that you told, because I think that that's really how we can have wonderful influences on each other in this world, is sort of sharing what we've made and having these kinds of connections with people. And that was one of the most wonderful things about traveling with the film.
It's interesting with Robert, what you're saying also in that, and just piggybacking on what Maria and Jen are saying, the idea that we were also learning about these ins and outs of the film industry in that process, that we were filmmakers, but we had not been involved as hands-on in the distribution of one of our films until Manna from Heaven. And so we would be in movie theaters 12 hours a day, from open to close, handing out our flyers, talking to people in the line who are buying their tickets saying, hey, would you like to see this movie? Because even as Maria's saying, there are huge departments who are making sure your poster's up but there were some theaters who didn't even have the movie name on the marquee, because there was nobody, we're five sisters. So there was nobody in each of these cities to go and see even that the name was for sale, like the name was up on you can buy a ticket to Manna from Heaven. So that kind of insight into, oh my gosh, we think of these things as like, oh, if you just work hard enough, anyone can succeed. Well, actually, there's this huge kind of system that gets momentum, right? And if you don't necessarily have that momentum with behind you, then sometimes it can feel like Sisyphus and you're rolling this rock up the hill and you just can never really get there. So for us, it was giving the insight into how that all works too. And then when you're making a film, you have hundreds, if not, many hundreds of people who are involved in the creative process, and you're not in control of each of those things. And part of that is the magic of movies. And you just kind of take a flyer and, trust that people are going to do their job and it's all good. You're all in this party together. And Manna from Heaven was one of those films where the story within the story also echoed of a community coming together, making something happen. And then that happened within the filmmaking itself, with incredible stories of people in Buffalo who helped make the movie happen. And, problems we were having and whatever, Charity and I were in a car accident, a lot of things in our family that were also coming into that playing. And then in the distribution to have, people, random example of the AMC CEO who happened to walk in the theater that day. And then that did help us actually, navigate some of that, and a ton of hard work. And then people like you who were coming to see the movie and then told their friends, and like that, I think it's a Clairol commercial or Pantene or whatever. They told two friends and then they told two friends.
Yeah.
So all that
so
is
on
like
and so on.
incredible part of movie making.
Yeah.
I love it.
I want to echo Gabrielle. Oh, go on.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Nope.
I was just going to say, I think it's so funny, that conversation, because I just on the way to this interview, I was practicing lines in the car. So nothing has changed from 20 years ago to now.
What's changed is the technology. It's
Yeah.
not on a cassette tape.
now
It's
I
on
use
your iPhone.
It's on my iPhone instead of my old tape recorder. Actually, I kind of missed my tape recorder, but it died a sad death. But anyway, I thought it was also really interesting that you said about the work that we've continued to do since then, and the sort of themes that continue to interest us, and how those sort of feed into each project. I just think you're very perceptive. It's really, like everyone else was saying, it's just really exciting to get feedback from someone who's seen the films and thought about them in such a thoughtful way. So I want to thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. Really. Thank you all you guys really for doing that here. But you're about to say, Jennifer, something real quickly here?
Oh, I want to think about Old Guy, just in terms of being our short form series, Old Guy, which, is 4 minutes for the pilot, right? Talk about short form, very, very short form, but talks about ageism in the media, and really thinking about some of these themes being full circle, where when we were first making Manna from Heaven, it's about a group of people who come into a lot of money, and then 30 years later, they find out it was just a loan. They think it's a gift, right? And they find out it's just a loan to pay it back. And when we were first talking to some larger production companies, they were suggesting that we make the people 20s or 30s, and 5 years passes, and then they have to pay the money back, because then you can cast young people. And even at the time, we were young, but we were saying, it's about sort of how hope is possible at any age, and how you can change and have new stories at any time, right? And so I think that
Plus, they had to have been affected by a little more life than just the 5 years that they were pitching us. So go on, Jen.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really about life experience, right? And I think that that's an interesting perception that you have, Robert, in terms of Old Guy being about somebody who's had a whole life of experience, and that you don't have that reflected in the media. Yeah. So often we have these kind of people who are foils for other characters, the comic fodder or whatever, for developed younger characters. And it's interesting to me, thinking back about Manna, where that was actually suggested to us, that we make, that we not have the older characters. So I think we have had an interest in people of all ages since early on. And it's kind of neat to have you make that connection, because I hadn't really thought of it in those terms.
Also, Old Guy was very much based on the experiences of our father, who had not been interested in being an actor. He was a professor of psychology, and it was when he retired, and we obviously were putting him in our films, like he had a little part with our mom in Manna from Heaven. Mm-hmm. But then when they retired and moved out to Los Angeles, because we were here, Ursula brought him into her agent, and he started getting a lot of work. And that's where we noticed how stereotypical so many of the roles were for, literally many of them were named Old Guy. Like, they did not have an actual character name. It was just, he was auditioning for the role of Old Guy. Right. Or, as he said, on a bad day, old guy. So, it was something that at the same time that we're trying to point out the richness that people can have in all stages of their lives. it interests me that you say that you were at the time wanting to be an actor, because maybe you will end up being an actor as your, a later career in life, as our dad had.
Yeah, he started when he was 70. So, that's
Right.
interesting. And he had a 20-year career.
It's funny because when I said that at the time, I was actually talking to you, Ursula. I remember because, we were discussing about your preparation and whatnot. And I think at the time, if I remember correctly, because I'm kind of vague on some of the finer details, but I do remember mentioning something about wanting to win Best Actor. And I'm going to thank you guys for this conversation. And then I remember you said specifically, remember to say Five Sister Productions, because people will listen to that and they'll ask who are the Five Sister Productions. So they'll ask, when you said thank you to Five Sisters, who did you mean by that? Then I can point out, well, they made a movie called, and then that would spread the word and bring more interest. And then again, that's where I've learned like how the word of mouth kind of spreads out like that. So that taught me a lot when it came to preparation, but also how word of mouth actually does have an effect in some way, shape, or form. Not necessarily in the theater capacity, but in other areas as well too. Which I was like, I didn't realize how much work was involved in just simply saying thank you to the following people, and then this guy, actor said thank you to this person. They must be really important. Let's look into their background or whatever the case may be. So that changed a lot. So when I started watching awards, that's the first thing I started doing. Who is he thinking? His manager? Who has he managed? The producer. What else did he produce? And you look at the filmography, like, oh, so they produced these. So it changed literally a lot for me just from that conversation alone. So, but what's interesting though, that I wanted to get your perspective on something here, because there was something that I did notice about Old Guy that I had a gut feeling that was experience from your father's, going through auditions and many other things as well too. And when you, Jennifer, just mentioned about how you guys were more or less kind of advised to change a lot of the story for what it was initially written, and how the production companies wanted you to change it to make it more with a younger cast, because I guess they would be more appealing for obvious reasons. But you've heard plenty of stories of directors, writers, actors who are presenting an idea, and it's a good idea, and the people that are hearing these ideas know that, and they still want you to change a number of different things because they want to meet these check marks to help promote the film and sell the film to a mass audience. But as the years have gone by, that's also another thing I noticed too. And I've talked to a lot of other writers and directors and actors who have shared countless stories about how they have experienced in some way, shape, or form, the major setbacks because of their skin color or their gender or whatever the case may be, their sexuality, so on and so forth. Not just with acting, but also in music and various other careers that they follow through with. But then I started noticing as the years have gone by, the very same people that have gone through those struggles are the ones that are making the most changes. Like you look, for example, like someone like Jordan Peele, who is an African American who grew up watching horror films, but he's known for making comedy for his background, considering his background, to say. Then he writes a horror film, but he knew that he couldn't make a horror film that is going to be at a certain budget. So he obviously went to the right people, and because of his credits, he had some leverage, which allowed him to be able to make the film that he wanted, which ended up being Get Out, which won him an Oscar. And now he is a household name that you put his name on a marquee, it's going to sell because of the years he had to get to that point. But he had to make a decision to follow through a path that he knew was not going to be an easy one to make. But that happens quite often, more so now, I would say, especially in the last 20 years, I would say specifically. And what I'm curious about with you guys is because I'm not saying that, you guys came in at a time where all that was in the beginning stages, but I think you guys came at a time where you guys, to some degree, I think you guys were ahead of the curve, because you're 5 women who have started a production company. I'm sure you have plenty of setbacks. And then as the years have gone by, you still maintain the same career, I would say, for the most part, when it came to being a part of the industry. But do you feel like with all these major changes along the way that's come through, do you notice a positive change about I'm not talking about the representation, but just about the opportunities that are given, because now that we're getting more films with lead female actors, and we're getting people of color, and we're also getting people of different sexuality or sexual backgrounds that are getting offered roles and main roles that would normally not be given to them 20 plus years ago. But considering your trajectory in your career, even like for a film, like for example, I came across For the Love of George. It's focusing on a lead female character whose best friend is gay, but the story wasn't about the sexuality of her gay friend. It's about her friend, his flaws, and her flaws, and then her perception of what she thought would make her happy, and came to realize what really was going to make her happy was changing her life altogether. And that was the focus of the story. It just happened to be a comedy, but that the comedy wasn't the focus. It was the actual journey. But, so it's a long question. I hope it's not too convoluted, but I hope you understand with what I'm trying to come from here, because I want to see from each of your perspective about how you felt like in your eyes, how things have changed, and if so, for the better, or maybe for the worse before it gets better. I want to hear what you guys' perspective is, being more or less in the ground level, if you will, from the industry side of it.
Well, I definitely want to speak to this because I have been very active with the Directors Guild and with Alliance of Women Directors and with Film Fatales, all these organizations that are really working to make change behind the scene. And so it's great that you're noticing change, and it's a weird chicken and egg, because what you're talking about when the powers that be say, oh no, we can't do that because it won't sell. Well, if they don't make it, of course it won't sell because it's not around to be sold. And so you kind of have to just change it through willpower. And like Ava DuVernay is a wonderful example, because she, with Queen Sugar, she just said, I'm hiring these directors that other people aren't taking a chance on, when it shouldn't be considered taking a chance, because they've already directed wonderful things. But within the industry, they weren't seen as a sure thing. And she gave, I forget how many, something like 42 directors chances over the course of Queen Sugar. And now they're all having spectacular careers because all they needed was that opportunity. Or Gina Prince Bythewood just talked about that with The Woman King. She had a lot of pushback. Well, first of all, even to get the movie made, they didn't feel that they could give the budget to do a movie about this Black woman, even though it was Viola Davis. I mean, it's crazy, the wisdom, the old wisdom of Hollywood. And then they prove when they actually do it that there are audiences for this. And so when when the movie was greenlit, then she hired people as her heads of her department that did not have the resumes that normally studios would feel comfortable with. But she knew it wasn't because they lacked passion or talent. It was just that they'd lacked opportunity. So there's a real push behind the scenes to try and make people aware that underrepresented people of all categories just have not had the opportunity. And there are all these stories to be told. So it's something that there's a huge amount of work being done, and I'm glad that in the last few years it's starting to show up on screen.
And it's really tricky because Maria knows you can speak to the statistics, and change is incremental, right? So in the times that we were born, people couldn't, like for instance, women couldn't go up the front steps of the library of the college I attended. So there are things like that were changed within our lifetime. And there were still things, even when I was at college, where women were going in the back door of something, not knowing that that's where they were being shuttled. So there are things that you just sort of, you think are unthinkable, and then they become thinkable. And it's like, we're constantly, progress can be very slow, and it can then also seem fast. And so meanwhile, there are these great opportunities now being opened up for people. And yet, and Maria, you can speak to the statistics of it, but it's still incredibly difficult being women in the film industry. And the numbers are just not there of hiring, and it's not equivalent. There are more women who go, I think it's more women who go to film schools, but within 10 years, there's something like, very little hiring of the women. The percentages drop precipitously, and it's because people just can't make a living because they're not hired. Now, where does that start? Is it that the agents make 10% and women make more money, and therefore the agents are going to promote, because who can blame them, right? So there are a lot of these things that come into play that are almost kind of systemic, and no single person is to blame in the, as a cog in the wheel. So what do you do? And so we as women said, well, we made one film, it did great. We made a second film, got really terrific response. Third film, Manna From Heaven. Then it's like, so what's the next step? And we had tons of meetings and all that stuff. Well, you're either going to kind of just, try to keep making films, or you're going to drop out. And so we had to find a way. So we created a path for ourselves to make those films. And they're not, multi-million dollar films, but they are, we find the way to make the work that we want to make. We find a way to get it out to people. And in the process, that's then setting the example for other people. We hire people who don't always get opportunities. We mentor people who would otherwise maybe not get those opportunities. We try to find them work after we've mentored them, and we have, funneled people into the industry. And so all of that is about kind of, what values are you wanting the world to be in the future? We stand on the shoulders of the people who came before us, the men and women before us, and there are going to be people who need to stand on our shoulders, and that's our responsibility. So that's how we approach the work. And we're grateful that we're able to find opportunities to continue making the work. It's not easy.
And we still have bigger projects that we're pushing. So
and then you get feedback, like we have a script on the Mercury 13 women astronaut trainees in 1961 and 62. And the feedback has been like, one of the things someone said is, well, it's all women, like you don't have a main man, like you've cut out you cut out half of your audience there. And then one of the people's gay. Well, then you've just cut out another 70% of that audience. So, but you're saying, well, wait a second, stories should be representative of all of us in America, of all of us in the world. So, why is it that can kind of keep being an echo chamber? So it's really exciting to see those opportunities opening, and we still have a long way to go.
Yeah, I agree too.
I wanted to piggyback a little bit on what you said about standing on the shoulders of other people, because right now we have a short film that we made as the first launch for part of a series on women in history. It's called Half the History. And so we're making a series of shorts. And this one actually was so fun. Charity could talk a little bit about who it's about. You want?
Oh, so it's with Idali Cassell, who is an amazing tap dancer. I'm actually a dancer, and I teach dance with LA Unified School District. It's my other job, and it's very exciting because she's somebody that I would teach actually when I do my little unit on tap, and so it was thrilling to then be able to make this movie with her and to meet her and to see her in person dance and just, off stage, she just ripping, and it was really exciting and to see how she got there. Right. So her story is kind of similar in some ways to our story, where she kind of did it on her own, and then she met certain people and they helped her out, and then she's helping out other people. And it's just kind of this I don't know the words, but just an exciting path that she has taken, and that the train that she has ridden, and she's still not, she's very well known, but she's still not out there still. So many people don't know who she is, and that's such a shame, even like just our story too, where yes, we've made so many films and we keep going, and yet we are known, but we're also not up there in the Oscars, so it's like this weird kind of thing of these people who are so amazing that we are lucky to work with and to make movies with, and yet there's still so much more to go.
Yeah. And one of the lines in that story is actually about standing on the shoulders of people that came before you. So we actually have her engaging on green screen with, she worked with Gregory Hines. She's actually the tap choreographer for Funny Girl right now on Broadway. So, incredible career. But she was looking, she had all of these models, but they were all men, it was Nicholson brothers and all these people. And so she felt this intense need to look for women. Were there any women? Right. And she found all of these women. So in the film, it's sort of a lot of what we're talking about right here is kind of recognizing the history, uncovering the history of people, honoring the people who came before us, and then sort of mentoring the next generation and having them be aware of the possibilities for them. Right. So I think that kind of seeing the past, present, and future is a lot of what we were engaged with.
And that's also what I do as a teacher, as Jennifer said, that a lot of us are teachers. And I think in our filmmaking and in our own personal other outside careers of being teachers or being filmmakers in one way or another, we do try to change the generations that are coming after us to guide them and to make them see bigger, to accept more people, to help more people out, to see the hope, to see the possibilities of what everybody can do and that's exciting. That's exciting to see a little kid, because I teach little kids, and to see in elementary school, a 4-year-old or even a 5th grader who, has never danced before, and to show them these films, just show them Idali Cassell and have them just wow and awed, and then see them trying to tap dance, and my teaching them some steps. And then it's just thrilling. And who knows, as you said, who knows, they could be the next tap dancer, the next movie star, the next whatever, the next president, whoever it is. Because if you give these people chances, if you give anybody a chance that typically wouldn't have that chance or wouldn't even know about that possibility or the way to look at a story or a person in a certain way, then it really allows for our world to blossom and to enhance everybody across the world.
Yeah, we can see that, because I think that there's a sense of, you either approach things with scarcity, that there are only a certain number of seats at the table and you need to compete amongst yourselves or amongst other, for those seats. And then there's an approach that the table can get wider. And so we've seen that actually digitally, that now there are, tons and tons of outlets for material, and it just keeps growing. And so the table can get wider, and people, want to hear different stories, and they want to see different types of faces, and they want different kinds of representation. And, that only makes us all richer. So I think that that's something that early on we felt that's our values, that's our goal, and we're going to apply it, behind the camera, in front of the camera, all that stuff. And just, keep going. It's always in process. History is a long, long line.
Sorry about that. Did you want to add anything to that, Ursula? Because I don't think you had anything. You had said anything.
I just feel like everybody covered it.
Well, so I guess then this kind of leads into another question, because one of the things that I was actually really curious about, because I've actually listened to a few interviews that I've come across here with you, Maria, specifically, and you as well, Ursula, from a number of years back. Actually, these two interviews that you both had done was around the time you guys were doing the promotional tour for Manna From Heaven. So it was about 20 years ago. So at the time, you guys were discussing about the lead up to releasing the film and some of the things you guys were going through and as far as trying to get the film released, and it was a number of different things, some of which you didn't reveal. I'm assuming for obvious reasons, but for another thing is because because it's an independent film, it's certain filmmakers didn't have the same clout to release a movie independently outside the system, because it's a very difficult thing. Now things have changed a great deal, where I'm not going to say it's easier, but it seems like it is a little bit more easier now to a degree to have your film released without having going to the studio to get the film financed and then being able to release the movie. Because I'm looking at your face also, because I think what I'm trying to say is that it's basically, I'm not sure if, I think easy is not the right word to use, but I think it's a lot more, maybe a little bit more feasible. It's just, there's certain things you can do now that you couldn't do X amount of years ago. I think some people are able to get a film made, and if you just know the right people, you don't have to go through this, some certain hurdles that may have been impossible to overcome, that I'm not going to say are easier to overcome now, but maybe it's not as difficult to get a knock at the door to be able to present whatever the project you're trying to get released here. I've talked to several people who have released the film completely independent, and then they've suffered some of the setbacks where some decisions that were made had done some wrong to them. Or you've had people who have been very successful and be able to release film through a distribution company where they have a great relationship and they've been able to garner enough money to be able to produce the next project, to the point where they're just producing project left and right, where the entire year is already filled up because they have so many films in preparation to be made that are 90% guaranteed to be made. But not a lot of people have that experience to be able to do that, to be able to pull it off here. So again, this is a long, convoluted question, but my real question is that I wanted to ask is that, for yourselves, considering what you guys have experienced from going through the release of Manna From Heaven to how things are going right now, do you all believe there's a certain side of getting a film distributed that's either somewhat easier, maybe not as easy as I made it seem like, but just somewhat easier, or is it just as difficult, if not more difficult, from your perspective?
I think there might be two things you're talking about, and I'd be interested to hear what everybody else thinks about this. There's definitely a huge shift from film to digital. So when we made Manna From Heaven, we shot it on 35 millimeter. Right. That has to be, you have to get the film, you have to have this huge equipment, you have to get the process, then you have to make prints. There were these huge Goldbergs that had to be carried from theater to theater. They had to be plattered. I mean, it was just like a whole system that was cumbersome and extremely expensive. Now, as everyone says, you can shoot a movie on your phone. What people don't tell you is that to shoot a movie on a phone is actually really not as easy as it might seem. Right. I mean, if you have like an incredible story and you have the perfect conditions to shoot it on a phone, then yeah, you might be that one person that makes, speaking of phones, I'm so sorry. You might be that one person that makes the movie and the film that actually gets some kind of distribution. But most people who get distribution for films that were made on phones they're being shot by DPs. They have a lot of equipment. They're being lit beautifully. Like they have special lenses for the phones. It's more complicated than just picking up a phone and shooting a film in general. And then even those films, like there is often money behind them and advertising behind them to get them out into the world. There certainly are more streaming services and places where people can sell their movies now and monetize their movies in some ways. But even that's it's very tricky and it's ever changing. So I would say that yes, in some ways, obviously it's easier. It's easier to produce and there's so many more outlets than there were. But there's also like less of a space. Now it's almost all like blockbuster films that are like gazillions of dollars. There's not so many of those mid-range movies that we used to see all the time. We don't see so many of those in theaters anymore. There's not like your 10 romantic comedies every year or whatever it is. So I don't know what everyone else thinks about.
And many are streaming streaming on Netflix or, one of the big services. And as Ursula's saying, they have a lot of money behind them to promote them because there's so much out there. How do people decide what to watch? So if you're just a little independent, you can put your film or project on YouTube, but are people going to actually watch it? I mean, yeah, you have some people who are huge YouTube stars or TikTok stars or whatever, but that's not the guarantee at all. Sorry, you're gone. Finish your thought.
You're saying, that's I threw it to you, but yeah, that's not the norm. There are exceptions and there are ways to do it, but it's just still really hard, I'd say.
Yeah. And I mean, I was going to say, I think even the YouTube stars and people like that, that's a full-time job. It's marketing. How do you get your content through the noise, right? So it used to be when we did shoot on 35 millimeter and you're submitting to a festival, that's a certain bar. Like it's just expensive and hard. And, you've had to have a lot of crew and a lot of organization just to get the movie made, right? So you've been vetted in certain ways just to get it made. Whereas now, because you have so much content, it's really a question of getting people to see it and recognize things that are really strong. So you get a lot of things that have stars attached, right? Because that'll be, that can be a distinguishing factor, or, somebody who has already had a success, right? So it's like, like with books, from the New York Times bestselling author, right?
Yeah.
It's ways of cutting through and letting people recognize, oh, this might be something worth my time versus 8 billion other things, right? And that doesn't mean that there aren't really, really good things that just have a lot harder time getting up there, right? And one thing I find over and over is that when things do break through, it's because somebody else who's famous will say, I saw this thing and it's great. Right. And suddenly something that's been around for a while and people didn't know about can make it through the noise. Right. So I think that that's just an interesting place where we are, that we have a lot of content and some of it is really good. And how does it get recognized especially without, millions of dollars in marketing budget behind it?
And I think what you said about knowing somebody, you had said that before, Robert, that if somebody knows somebody, then they have more clout to get out there. I think that though it has always been the case. I really think that's always been happening for actors or for directors. And if you know a famous person or somebody that has a lot of power or a lot of money, you'll have a lot more opportunity.
Do you guys, I'm sorry, you're about to say?
Oh, I just was going to piggyback on that too. Again, just to say that I think being an artist is, complicated. And sometimes, a lot of things are with connections or money or whatever, access. And then it's true. You're right that YouTube and all these things have created new paths for people. And that's actually why I think there's more diversity of voices now, because they have found audiences by putting content out that then audiences want to see. And then bigger companies recognize the money, potential in it, and then they will take it in, and then it becomes a bigger mainstream type of product. And so it always comes down to money. And one of the things that we said, and probably directly to you, Robert, in Washington, was about how you vote at the box office, you vote at the, every movie you're watching on Netflix is getting recorded. Every thing you're clicking on is, somebody is following that and it's monetized. And so that actually is a very powerful vote. And so if you want to see more content of something, people have to vote for it. And that either means going to the movie theater and paying with your ticket, buying the, whatever film you'd be downloading, or, if you're a DVD collector or something, but still. But, that's really where audiences have enormous power. And that's what's changing and opens up new opportunities for other voices. And it really just comes down to that, because otherwise you can't get that access. And then that becomes an echo chamber in itself, right? We've all heard of the Marvel movies or whatever, because it's got such a machine behind it. So I think that's something to consider as a consumer. You're really empowered to make a difference in that way.
Do you guys believe that at some point that when it comes to, because the thing, I've had a discussion with several filmmakers in the past where they have because the fact that there are so many outlets for people to watch the films, through various different streaming platforms. One of the bigger ones that I remember at the time when I first came across, my wife was the one that told me about it, was Tubi, and it was mostly just like B-rated type movies. And then slowly it started gaining more attention, and to the point where now they're putting in blockbuster films in their catalog, where you're getting films that 5-6 years ago would never be on that platform, and all of a sudden they're featuring a lot more Clint Eastwood movies, Brad Pitt films, and so on and so forth. But the question I'm trying to ask is that because there's so many different ways to have the films viewed by the audience now, in your opinion, do you guys think that there's more opportunities for independent filmmakers to be able to get their work out there a little bit more on a wider platform? But the problem that I'm also seeing too is that, because I think you may have hinted as well too, Ursula, where unless you have a very well-known actor in a movie that might have some clout and bring some attention to it, but otherwise, if you're making a movie and you're releasing it and you get lucky to get it, in this case, get it released on Tubi, but Tubi, the distributors are not going to promote it, and now you're left with the job and having to promote the film. So you have social media as a way to be able to do so. So it seems like promoting things now is almost independent to a degree, where filmmakers and actors and so on and so forth are going out of the way to spread the word on the movie. Because I'm actually talking to an actor right now whose film's being dropped as of this recording this week, and he's reached out to the studio, hey, I want to help promote the movie. And according to him, they gave him a trailer and said, well, you can just release it on your social media platform. And that was it. And I was like, so how much of this promotional stills you have for the film that you can release? He's like, I don't know. And I'm trying to find reviews for the movie too. And he sent me two. I'm reading it. They're good reviews, but I was like, but these are only two I can find so far. So the studio or the distribution company are not doing much of anything to help promote the film other than releasing the trailer and giving us the job to do it for them. So I see a lot of that happening as well too, where it seems like the filmmakers are left with the job and having to do all the work of all the heavy lifting, unless you have like a Netflix film that has a lot of star power with a big name director with some serious credits behind them. And meanwhile, the little guys are left to do all the heavy lifting. And there's a lot more of their films out there, but it's hard to sift through. I hate to say it like this, but all the good stuff and the bad stuff, because I don't think anyone wants to go through all that. They want to see what's a good film. Good. I want to see that. Does it have 5 stars? Great. I'll check it out, and then I'll decide for myself. That's kind of the general consensus here. So again, it's a long, convoluted question, but I'm curious to see if you guys think that because there's more platforms, that there's more opportunities for independent filmmakers to be able to make their movies and have a chance for them to be released. Because I know you guys answered that question to a degree here, but because there's a different avenue about having to get filmmakers I've never heard of before get their films released, and as a result of having their films released, I'm able to check out their previous work, and I can see where they've changed from being, starting off in these low independent films to higher budget movies, and you can clearly see the trajectory change and how the quality has changed, the directing has changed, the writing has changed, and the amount of actors they've been able to work with has also changed as well too, where it changed a number of different things for them. Now the representation has changed, their budget has changed as well too, where they're getting more work, more money, so on and so forth. And I love seeing that trajectory, but it took a long time for these directors and actors to be able to get to that point. But they had to start from the very bottom, and then they slowly got to where they're at a point where I'm not going to say they're comfortable. They understand this is a very fickle business, but they know what they've got, and they're able to take advantage of the situation to work on bigger projects that they've been wanting to work on, but projects that they're passionate about here, which is a very rare opportunity that I'm starting to see a little bit more filmmakers, independent filmmakers, getting that chance to be able to make those type of films. So that's really my main question to you: is that do you feel like that has changed a lot more, especially for yourselves, where I'm sure you guys are working on several different projects, but considering your track record of the films you have and the films and actors you've worked with here, has that helped you to some way, shape, or form, where people are interested in wanting to work with you and finance your film? Because we have a script, but it requires X amount of money, and we believe with our track record, we may have something that we can offer because we've worked with said actors and we've worked on these number of films for this amount of money, for this amount of time. But look at the success we've had here so far with all these different various films we've worked on. Has anything like that for you felt like you felt has changed for the better to gain more opportunities for you to get more work or more money to finance your films and so on and so forth? I apologize for the long, convoluted question, but I hope you understand where I'm coming from with that.
You sparked many thoughts actually in your question, so I'm just going to hit on some of them. As a director, the last 2 features I did, I was a director for hire. So we did not evolve them out of Five Sisters Productions. We came in and partially I was hired because they saw, like you're saying, that I had the experience, that I could work with people. And there's one movie that I love called A Sort of Homecoming with Laura Morano. And
I saw that. Yeah.
There. Okay. And the thing is, it was on Netflix and all the different streaming services. And then it rotates off. And then when I want people to see it, there's no way for them to see it. Like it's on
Freeview right now, I believe. That's how I came across it.
Oh, good. I'm so glad to know that. Because as far as I knew, like when people say, how can I see it? I'm like, I don't know. But I don't have any control of that. I was a director for hire, brought in by other producers. They sold it. So you're kind of at the mercy of what the other people do with it. And so that's one thing that in some ways it can be a joy as an artist because you can just go in and do your work, and the goal is to always be practicing your craft. But it is very, I think as filmmakers, we are in an unusual position in large part because of that experience with Manna From Heaven, where we have really understood the whole life cycle of a project, that it's not just making it, but it's also getting it out into the world. And that we've been able to control some of that because we have ownership of things. And then, did we already talk about the Academy? Someone, Ursula, why didn't you talk? Yeah, Ursula, I'll throw it to you. Yeah.
Okay.
No pressure.
Well, the Academy of Arts and Sciences has contacted us, and they wanted to keep all of our films in their vaults and preserve them. And that's been super, super, super exciting as a way to make sure that the films continue to have a life. I don't really know what you wanted me to say about it though, Maria. Take it back.
We'll talk about putting it on 4K and with that.
Just about re-releasing, and yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they were talking about, I mean, it's really a wonderful thing in some ways because you're talking, I had a lot of thoughts too on the thoughts that you had, Robert. But one of them is, there's that saying of the 20-year overnight success story. Mm-hmm. And so you work at something, or there's that book, what's the one where it's like people are ready, and the Malcolm Gladwell book where you work and work and work, and then part of it's luck, part of it's talent, part of it is, perseverance. A lot of it is perseverance. And then a big chunk of it is luck and timing, right? So you can have the talent and then you apply it and you just work. And then if the market happens to open up and find a place for you and your thing is successful, that's the luck and the timing. So that's been true with, pretty much all massive success stories because people were passionate about something, they honed their skills. Then when the market was ready for them, they were there. And so I think that goes into a lot of things. I mean, I think, it's funny because people always say cream rises to the top, but our mom had this wonderful line is sometimes cream just curdles because there are so many millions of talented people in the world, right? And who gets a chance to have the time and the funding and all that stuff to do, the art that they want to work on. That's the first thing. And then who gets, once they've done that, which is this incredibly difficult thing to do, who gets seen, who gets, and then of those people, who actually becomes well known for it, and then who gets hired again is another huge hurdle. And so you can have people who have these incredible, there are a lot of women who have incredibly successful films, win all these festival awards and stuff, or even win, huge awards, and then you never hear from them again. Well, why didn't they get hired again? It's just like they're all these.
I think the data shows for feature films, the average was 10 years for women from one feature to the next feature. So by that metric, we were very prolific. But
and it isn't about talent, and it isn't about ability. It's about all these other factors that go into it. And so I feel like the answer to your question is there more opportunity? Yes and no. It's not.
Well, and also I want to say to what you're, Gabrielle, to piggyback on you, is I think one thing that has been very important in all of our careers is having each other as a supportive, we're all artists under this Five Sisters Productions umbrella who support each other's passion. And I think it is very hard to be an artist, and people often, if they don't have that support, it's just hard to keep going. And so people countless times say, you're so lucky to have your sisters. And I really have come to understand how true that is. So anyway, Gabrielle, that was just a thought on what you said. I don't know if you were done.
I actually kind of want to pick it up off what that statement just made, because that's one thing I was really happy to see, that you all were still very much working together, especially in the industry here. But this actually was a question that I wanted to ask you guys, all of you as well. So I'm hoping you all can answer this question here for me, because one of the questions I've come to learn to ask more often now with anyone in the industry is that, this is this business, I've learned pretty early on, is not for the faint of heart. This is a very rough business, that there are going to be a lot of highs and a lot of lows. It's very, very rare to see someone be very successful and be more or less at the top for a consistent amount of years. I mean, there's only a handful of actors and directors that come to mind that you can think of right off the bat. Spielberg being one of them, who's got like accolades of rewards and it was a huge box office success, but he's one of like tens of millions of directors out there that are doing this here, and he's one of the very few that's been able to keep a consistent career. It's a very rare thing. But the more common stories you hear is of people who have made it an attempt and have reached some sort of success and then never are heard from again. But then I've as the years have gone by, I've come across a lot of filmmakers and actors who have worked on several different projects that I've never heard of them, but I know the project they've been in, and they've been able to maintain a pretty consistent career. And they're not famous by any means, but they have a pretty relatively successful career in terms of being able to get work. Either got paid very well in certain jobs, didn't get paid very well in other ones, but one way or another, they've been able to get work. It wasn't easy, but they've been able to maintain a consistency in their career. And those are the ones that I'm actually the most interested in. The reason for that is because they've experienced being up close and personal with a lot of the fame and glory that they can see all the other successful actors and directors have been receiving, and see how they work in ground level, and then seeing them from afar or at the premieres and see how they really are under those bright lights, if you will. And then when they're at a point where they have no work and they're not getting any momentum for their career for either a couple of months, maybe to a year, but they still grind it out and try to get the next set of work they can. And the question I always ask is, why do you still keep doing it if it's that difficult? Because it can be very strenuous on yourself, on relationships. I've heard countless stories where people have gone over to other states or other parts of the country, around the world, and they're working for a short period of time, but that means they're missing out on birthdays, family events of that nature, things of that nature. And then when they come back, they've missed out on that stuff, but the work that they did elsewhere didn't really take them anywhere. It was an opportunity for them to get the experience to work with said writer, said director, or whatever the case may be, and they have that experience to add on to their credits. But maybe they didn't do it for the reasons they thought it was going to be fulfilling for them. It was just, a business decision. So there's a lot of those type of stories as well. So my question to you all is that, because you guys have been doing it pretty consistently for well over 20 years at this point, I'm curious if at any point, if you guys have ever considered just flat out stopping, if there was any point in your career where you feel like we're not getting any traction for ourselves here, and therefore maybe we should just call it quits and move on to other endeavors, or maybe one was getting more work than the other, and was there any sort of issues that came along with that you have all learned to overcome, to talk with each other about that? Because that's another thing too. I think a lot of people don't realize that there's some friction that may come with that if you're not prepared for that. And I'm wondering if you guys had all learned how to prepare for that in the event something like that would occur, because there's countless stories as well too of siblings and families who work with each other. Next thing you know, 10 years later, they're not even talking to each other. So I'm wondering to see how you guys conduct yourselves under those circumstances, and if you ever came to a point of just simply walking away because of the amount of work that's involved that may not lead to anywhere.
Well, I think that there's so many things that do go into making a movie or any kind of project. And I think that it's been talked about, Maria said it and other sisters said it, that you need to have somebody in your corner. And I think us as a family, we have always been in each other's corner. And we were taught that by our parents at a young age, that you clap for your sister. Even if you don't have the part, that's okay, because she got the part. And because it's just going to come around to you one day. And I think we all have different passions, but if we continue to see each other's ideas through and help each other out, then we know that they're going to help us out when we have our passion project. And Maria said that we have an umbrella company, and we do. We each have different things that we want to go after and to make happen. And as I said, we have to help each other out. And I think the people that don't have those siblings, don't have that person that is next to us. You see it when you read a book, the dedication section, it always says, or the acknowledgements, thank you, this person, for always reading the different chapters and the different ways it was written, because you need somebody in your corner. And I think we've always been there. And we've had different, like for me, I have a different career that I've had the entire time that I've been in the company. And a lot of times my sisters will make films and I'll come in and do whatever I can do on that film. But we still are there always to support each other. So whatever it is.
Filmmaking itself is like a family, and so
Yeah.
it expands and contracts. And you have to rely and trust a lot of people in order to make a film. And I think that with as siblings, we're able to it contracts back down to us. But I think, Robert, basically, yes, to all of those things you said. We have gone through stages where we each want to totally give up and do something else, or we have revisited,
That's not true, Gabrielle.
Well,
I don't think we have.
I think it's about trying to figure out how to achieve the goal, because there are definitely things projects we've worked on that we've decided to, turn elsewhere because it wasn't working, or we weren't going to get funding for something and it was really hard to let that go. Or there are other ones that we're saying, no, we're just going to keep hitting our heads against the wall because this means so much to us. And someday we're going to make that dang thing come hell or high water. And so I think that's the thing that happens, is that, when one of us is demoralized, another one can come in and say, hey, it's another day. And then the other thing that always in these kind of fields people talk about is you have to be so passionate about it. And one thing that was interesting with our parents is that they were artists themselves. And then I don't think they ever steered us for or against going into the arts. And we all came to the film company from different paths that we ended up choosing to work together. And it really was something, because I think that the interest in this art form, which our parents were not at all involved in until later when we roped them into it, for our various films, that was something where we came to it and we chose it, and we were, we want to do it. And so you have to have really thick skin. You have to have incredible perseverance. And then I think from our values as a family, it also was about, we're interested in putting work out there that is something we care deeply about, that is something that'll move the needle a little bit, that'll also move the needle behind the scenes to start including other people in this industry. And that's why we keep doing it in a big part, because we care so much about this art form on both sides of, the storytelling and behind the camera.
We also continue to bring in, we also continue not just our family, our just nuclear family, but we do bring in certain people that we work with again and again and again. And I think we broaden our family as we continue on with our projects. We say, oh, well, that we worked really well with that person. We want to work with them again. And it just grows and grows.
That's right. Different DPs, different actors, we have a sort of growing company of people that we work with over and over. I wanted to talk about just growing up with Mom and that experience. Our mother was a writer and she published many books, but there were these periods where she was working on, actually her first novel, she didn't get published. She'd published a memoir, and she published poetry, then a memoir, and then this novel, she just worked and did not have success. And then 30 years later, she revisited the same story and she ended up having great success with two versions of the same story. She wrote a memoir called Searching for Tamsin Donner, which we're actually making into a limited series right now. Very exciting. Right. And then a novel that was also about Tamsin Donner. But it took 30 years to sort of have the world kind of get ready to have that story, to have her be the artist to tell that story, figure out, what forms, all of these things had to come together to make that happen. And I think for us growing up to have seen that even with the things that were being published, how much editing went into it. I teach now at Tufts University, and I talk with my students about, you get down a draft of something and then you edit it and then you edit it and then you edit it. Yeah. Right. And that's so much of the work is pre-production or post-production, right? It's not about the 6 weeks you're on set for a feature or whatever it is, right? It's about all of the stuff that getting everything that you can set up before so that your vision can have a chance to be on the screen, and then doing all of the work afterwards to make it a beautiful piece of work, and also then to market it, right? So I think that having grown up with somebody who modeled the way that you are so often revising and you're figuring out what is the best way to tell a story, and you're figuring out what story do I want to tell, right? That what is sort of something that I can tell in a way that nobody else can tell. I think those kinds of questions, growing up with somebody who was figuring out the answers for herself, really gave us things to hold on to when things are hard, because they are, right? But seeing somebody else who kept going and then had success is just, it gets you through the times when it's just a lot of work.
And we're dealing with rejection over and over again, that you don't take other people's rejection as the end of your story.
Right.
And I feel like it's coming to terms with understanding that, as they always say, it's the process. Like I have never considered giving up this career. Like I always joke with my partner that I will do this until I die. Like being an artist is my identity and my passion, and gives me joy, even when it's banging your head against a wall. It is very fulfilling in ways that I think you have to come to appreciate that maybe that's all you're going to get. Maybe you're not going to get the big outside recognition. And one thing about art, though, is you do need an audience or you don't just create to put it in a drawer. You want to share your what your vision is and your perspective on things to other people. So you kind of want that, but sometimes that audience can be small. And if you've just reached one person, I mean, even just like the fact that you have this memory of that screening, that is so fulfilling to me, that just, it's a reminder that you can reach out and just touch, connect with people, as you're going through life. And that's very gratifying.
Is there anything that you guys have done? And I'm not asking you to just give me specifics here or give me any names, but the reason I'm asking is because, every director, writer has done something that, I could have done this better, or don't like what I've done here at all. And the reason I'm asking this question for all of you is because, there's perception about why they feel about a certain project, whether they liked it or not, or they absolutely hate it. But along the way, maybe something had changed your perception about that experience, and maybe you don't look at it in that negative light anymore because of what you have learned throughout the years that have changed your perception about how you looked at yourself at that time, your experience at that time, and then maybe found a way to pulling a positive out of that negative, if you will. Because all of you really strike me as a group of individuals that, despite what you guys go through, you still find something to help in try to find a solution, whether it be a solution to the problem or a solution to help yourself through the problem, and then be able to be content with yourself, be happy with it, because you've learned how to deal with the situation to the best of your ability without losing your temper, without losing a piece of yourself in terms of like selling your soul, if you will, I guess is the best way I could describe it here. So I'm wondering if you guys have any sort of experience like that, where you have looked at yourself at certain points in your career where you realize that wasn't the best decision I made in my career, but I can understand why I made that, and I'm happy that I went there, so I can learn from that. I think is the question I'm trying to ask at its core. So whoever wants to take that question there.
I'm not sure that there's any one thing that I can think of just right now that would be like, oh, that was a bad decision, or that I would look at it differently. But I will say, when you were talking, it sparked the thought that I've often had of how often in projects that I've made or we've made, I felt really frustrated that we didn't have the resources or the equipment to do the thing that is in my head. Like there was something I really wanted to get on film or digitally or whatever. And for whatever reasons, we just didn't have the money, or we just didn't have the talent in front of the camera, or we just didn't have the, the right equipment or the right crew that knew how to do it or whatever, where it just wasn't what it could have been. And I found that really hard. But what I do feel that with a little bit of distance, which might even just be a day, like it's not always like 20 years later.
Right.
I think that I also feel incredible pride in those things that we've done, that we've been able to get what we got with those limited resources in those situations, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Because I feel like sometimes it's really exciting to say like, okay, well, I don't have the crane. I really wanted a crane shot. I don't have a crane, or I really wanted a matrix shot and I don't have the resources for that. How am I going to tell this story, this piece of this story in a different way? Can I light a match in someone's sunglasses and that's the explosion of the bridge? Like, what can I do that can tell the story with limited resources successfully? So I think it's what you're saying. I think we all have this ability to see both sides of the coin. It's like, yes, it's frustrating, but how can I challenge myself? How can I find this interesting? How can I make this more like a puzzle to achieve something that I'm trying to do? I think that there's still a huge piece of me that just wants to be able to walk on a set and just do what I wanted to do all along, like do each of the shots that I had planned. But I think no matter what level of filmmaker you are, no matter how much money you have, there's always those pieces that you can't control because you have so many other departments. I remember specifically in one movie that I directed, I really wanted a costume a certain way. And it had been from beginning of pre-production. It had, it was going to be this way. It was described, and then on the day, it wasn't made. So it was like, okay, well, that's never going to be in the movie. But ultimately it didn't matter. It didn't ruin the movie. Nobody else knows this incredible idea that I have. They're just watching the movie the way it is. So I think you sort of learn that it's not a perfect art. There's just too many moving pieces. There's too many people involved. So you have to let some of that go. And I think that can be a real richness as an artist. There's always something else you can look forward to. So that's just what I thought.
Yeah, I'm thinking of two stories there. One was just making Idali, the tap dancing movie that we made, where we have her literally dancing with people. So she was in front of green screen and she's dancing with these archival clips of different women throughout history. Well, normally you would have pre-digitization. You do it all, and she would have all of that information that she could be dancing with, but we didn't. So we're like showing her the video and she's doing it. I mean, it was so completely amazing that it worked. And I was at this film festival. We just won Best Short Doc at Lunenburg Film Festival, which is super great. And
Congrats.
People were like, the green screen is so fabulously done. You had these technical coordinators. And I was like, no, I was working with my sisters, my students, a fabulous team of mentors. But I mean, we were making it work with extremely limited,
resources,
technology on set. Yeah. And I just think that is one of those kinds of cases where you figure it out with what you got. And it's so wonderful when people sort of appreciate, the final result and you pull it off. It's kind of a miracle sometimes.
I was just at a digital day at the Directors Guild where it opened with the Daniels talking about how they did Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Oh yeah.
And it closed with James Cameron with his Avatar number 4 or whatever. And the contrast between the resources that they had, and yet they both pull off these amazing things. I mean, the Daniel stuff is just as wonderful, even though they're doing it with you can look on YouTube, actually, they have a lot of their videos. They're so wonderful.
Yeah.
And I mean, in some ways, almost more joyous because they're getting their hands right in there, figuring out how can we make it happen. And I think that's very much what Jen's talking about with the
Yeah. And then the other story I was thinking of was when we first started out, before Manna From Heaven, actually. Ursula and I lived for New York for a year, and we were acting. And I just remember sending out all of these headshots. We'd get these headshots made, and we would send them out to all of these casting calls. And now, or not very many years after that, I was on the other side of the table and I was the one receiving all the headshots. And I am able to have a sense of compassion for people on all of these different levels because of that. It was not an effective way to get a job as an actor. I know that, right? And I see other people doing that, and I'm able to either guide them if I have any interaction with them, or I'm able to just be more understanding about desire and not knowing what are the best strategies, all of these things all along. So I think even experiences that are not necessarily productive in one way can make you a better artist.
For all of you, what's the one thing that has not changed for you at all? And when I'm asking this question, I'm specifically more focusing on like the way that you approach, whether it be writing, acting. Like for you, Ursula, you mentioned before just now, in the beginning of the conversation, that you were rehearsing your lines on the way over here. Very much how you just described to me when you and I were speaking 20 years ago. But as far as like, that approach is concerned, like, is there something that you guys have done that's been very successful for you that you have not changed at all because it's worked, so therefore if it's not broken, don't fix it? Or maybe along the way, what worked before didn't necessarily work for you anymore, and you change and realize what changes you've made has actually turned out much better for yourself, whether it be the writing process, acting, directing, or conversing with somebody about during a pitch meeting or whatever the case may be. I'm curious to see what you guys have learned throughout the years that has worked and hasn't worked, and then has worked later on that you felt like has made things better for you in terms of communications, preparation, things of that nature.
I think
go on, you tell.
I think the way that we communicate as a family, there's always a underlying respect, and I think and love and support, and we want each other to succeed. We want the best for each other, and I think that is something that has allowed us to continue in a company for this long, and to not only work together but like being together. We like each other, and I think that is something because of the way that we do talk to each other. And if we have a difference of opinion, we discuss it and we talk about it, and we, have a understanding at the end of what that difference of opinion was. And oftentimes it sparks new ideas, or it sparks better ideas. And I think that's something that I think has really helped us and has not changed per se. I mean, maybe in our terminology, but yeah, go ahead.
And yet it's interesting, Charity, I wouldn't have thought of this, but in the beginning, we did have to refine the way that we did it because since we were siblings, we never were stopping work. And it would be like, we had to start setting boundaries of, you cannot talk about, have you made this phone call to so-and-so when we're, on Christmas Day or something like that. And so that was really hard because it was, we're all incredibly passionate. It's, our livelihoods on the line. And so you have to figure out a way to navigate personal and professional. And that was something that took some, figuring out over years of like, how do you do this where it's going to be for the long run? Because it's not just one project. It's going to be, 30 projects. And so.
Yeah. I'm curious what you all think about this. So I'm going to throw something out there and see, but we started out doing a lot outside the system, and it was it was like the Manna From Heaven story, which I told you that inside the system, they wanted us to make a different movie, and we wanted to make this movie, and we made that movie. And then, MGM distributed it, right? So we got in the system, but it was after we had made the movie, been in theaters for over a year, done all those things, right? And then we would hook in sort of with a system in different ways afterwards. And I think that now, like I know Maria's work with the DGA and other things that sort of, there's perhaps more space that there wasn't before to actually tell some of these stories within the system. But it's an open conversation, because I think that being, sort of navigating when you're working with the powers that be, and when you're working outside of it, you have different freedoms. But I think that's something that has changed in society, and that also I think we have changed somewhat relatively recently. I don't know if other
I
people
don't
think
think we
about that.
knew. I mean, honestly, I don't think that we knew that there was such an inequality in the system when we started out, because it was the heyday of the indie film. It was Sundance and all this stuff. We knew all those filmmakers. Maria was sitting with Steven Soderbergh when he's doing Sex, Lies, and Videotape and like figuring out the title of it. You know, there, Allison Anders, we knew her. Like, there was all this exciting stuff of like, oh my gosh, we're coming up, you know, behind those folks, and we'll all be the next generation. And yet there was this, like, it's not even necessarily a glass ceiling. It was like a glass cube around filmmakers of just like, you know, where do you can make this thing, and then where do you go next, and trying to find the door, not even the, you know, ceiling to go through. And I think that that was something that over time became clear, and then people started feeling more comfortable talking about it, and then people started, you know, with the Me Too movement, et cetera, people started actually talking, and then that data breach that then showed salaries of top earners and how radically different that was. And then the statistics came out about, you know, how many people are being hired from different demographics. And suddenly it's like, oh my gosh, you know, it isn't necessarily about some choices we were making, like, could we make a better choice, or could we do this differently in a film? And some of these things were completely out of our control. And so that actually, I mean, it's sort of a meta level idea of like, you know, things that you wish were a little different. It would have been interesting to have that information, to know, you know, certain choices were not going to impact, you know, your trajectory. But even that, even along the way, we saw friends or colleagues who were making choices based on the market, like, this thing's selling, so I'm going to make this type of movie because that will be my ticket into, you know, the next thing. And we were saying to her, I mean, we'd meet as sisters and say, well, do we really want to make that type of thing? Do we really, you know, is this project something we're passionate about? Because it's not just a 3-month, you know, commitment. These things will take years and years, some of them. And so like Kings, Queens, and In-Betweens that we'd made a documentary took 6 years. And, you know, that's still ongoing. Like, we got the rights back, and now we need to, you know, get the next distributor involved. And so those things, why are we doing it? It's because we love this work, and because we care about the films that we're making. You know, so that's, again, it goes back to all this complexity and all of these things that you're picking up on. There's so much complexity in this field that it's hard to give a yes, no answer on this stuff, because it's all mixed together.
I love what you're saying, Gabrielle, because I do feel like that was a great comfort when all that data came out, and I mean, I think so many women, people of color, you know, all the underrepresented demographics went, oh, I'm not doing anything wrong. It's hard for, like, the numbers were so small of the people who were working and then climbing up. I mean, even Sundance came out with these great numbers of their classes, that the films would be picked up by bigger distribution companies for the white guys. And it was just like, whoa, it's immediately they're getting more marketing dollars behind them. They're getting better reps behind them. And so just this sense that people were all questioning themselves, what am I doing wrong? What could I do differently? You know, even people who would have this self-doubt as an artist, am I not talented enough? And those numbers came out, and people just felt so this wonderful relief in a way of, okay, it's systemic and we need to fix the system. So the people, it gives you something also that you can work on. I mean, it would be nice if you could just work on your art, but also in the bigger picture of the world. And this comes all the way back to, you know, what everyone's been saying about standing on the shoulders. Like, even if you don't do it for yourself, you can do it for other people and open doors for the people coming after.
You know, there's something that because what you just said there, Maria, was interesting, because there's a question that just came up to me here where I was, you know, you all talked about those numbers that were released and how various people were realizing that it's not me, it's the system, it's the problem. But the thing that I also noticed too is that because we're getting a lot more films of, you know, with people of color telling their side of the story, whether it be in horror, whatever the case may be, there's more films of that sort. But it's also there's still a risk factor behind it too, because can the movie still sell, despite the fact that it's a all black cast, or it's, in this case, Bros just came out recently and didn't do very well in the box office, and people have their opinions as far as why it didn't do well, despite the fact that the film is very well received. But the thing is that, I've always, I personally feel that, although I'm very happy to see it, and I'm very, very happy to see that, but I also am more interested in seeing the gray areas about the realities of like people of color, the realities of a mixed race person, or just a certain culture, in this case, me being Hispanic, in the Hispanic community, where there are not a lot of great things that occur within that circle. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I always feel like that there's a lot to be said about this. Of like, there's a real issue that's within the circle that could be dealt with if we possibly make a film out to bring it to a wider audience, to bring more attention to it. But the thing is that if you do that, it may be portrayed, or in some people's eyes, may be perceived as being, you're portraying that in a negative light. Well, those are my experiences that I have growing up. Those are my stories of what I've been through. And I'm telling these stories here because I want people to know this is what it's like, and this is what it was like for me. And I've seen that with other people of, whether it be who are Black, Asian, whatever the case may be. I know they all experience that as well too. There's a lot of gray areas that need to be dealt with it. But the thing that I'm curious about from your perspective is that because we're seeing a lot more representation, a part of me is wondering, are we just seeing the beautiful side of it rather than the realities of it, like showing the real harshness of what it's like in that culture, or for a person of that color, or a person of that sexuality? Because there's a lot of conversation where people have that they point out like, I like this, but I'm not happy with the film because me being a person of this background knows the reality is it's not like that, and they just did that because they want to appeal to the mass audience, and I'm not okay with that. I understand why they did it. I am happy we're seeing that, but I'm not happy with the actual story that we're told, because those aren't the realities of what we go through. So I'm curious to your perspective.
That's exactly the problem of not having enough of these stories being told, because like the Latino, there's not one narrow Latino culture. There are so many that when you're putting all that responsibility on one film or 3 films or 5 TV shows, it's still not enough. You need to have many so that they can represent all those different experiences. And then people wouldn't be criticizing, well, that's not my experience. And I mean, that they're just way too few still. So that's why we're pushing.
Interesting point.
And you also have to have people who are the decision makers who are coming from different experiences, because you do have also problems like, say, for Black stories, you had for a long time so many stories about enslaved people and so many stories about people working domestic jobs, right? And it was just, those were the stories that kind of got made. Or a lot of stories about young women, like tons of nudity. And it's just not, those stories are totally fine, but those were the stories that just got made over and over and over. And you just see a series and it would be just very quick till they got to the nudity, right? And there are all of these other stories that were not getting greenlit because they didn't fall into those sort of patterns. And actually, we as a company were really aware of this when we were releasing the first one of the Half the History series, that we released Idali's story first because it's about tap dancing. And we actually have this wonderful story about Belinda Sutton, who was the first person to get reparations in the 1780s. She actually petitioned and successfully got money for her enslaved labor. But we did not release that first for the series because it's important to know the context. It's important to know what other stories are out there. And it's great to have her story when there are more stories, right? We did another one on Shirley Chisholm, which may be one of the next ones that we release. We did one on abstract expressionist artists, Helen Frankenthaler and Elaine de Kooning and Joan Mitchell. And, when you start getting tons and tons of different voices, you can't stereotype. You can't say, oh, that's this experience, that's that experience, right? You end up with so many, even in Idali's in Tapping Into Our Past, she engages with 5 different female tap dancers from, the 30s and 40s And all of them have totally different styles. So even if you're just talking about this like very narrow definition of, women who made it to the movies, who, are dancers of a certain kind of style, they are radically different. So you can't even stereotype there, right? So I think that's one thing that we've been really, really invested from the beginning, is sort of trying to get as many different perspectives represented that maybe don't fit into sort of this first thing that people think of. And those are harder to get out there into the world, but they're really, really important because that's how we break down stereotypes.
It's even interesting within our family that we have come to the company and then we'll pitch an idea that we're individually passionate about. And so we've had a huge range where in tomorrow night, there's a kind of special event about some of our short films that are being feted at the Glendale International Film Festival in Los Angeles. And the Maria and Ursula, wanted to really bring in other filmmakers to make it a conversation about keeping on, like sort of how do you persist against the odds, rather than it just being a celebration of, a selection of our films, to make this sort of more of a community building event. And so there are all these different people who are going to be involved in this evening. And, that the films just selected from ours include Ursula's directorial, The Happiest Day of His Life, which is about a traditional heterosexual wedding in a gender reversed world. So it's a comedy because we don't expect to see a man walking down the aisle with a veil on a top hat, or, men wearing these beautiful lilac suits that they'll never wear again as the groom's, men. And so then we have Maria's directed Pandemic Screams, which is about a phenomenon that was happening during the pandemic that started in the pandemic, of women who were juggling parenting and work, and then would form these scream circles in public parks and just go and scream together. And then there's a short that Ursula directed also about two sisters who are older women, and the idea of going back into the dating world, and how do you do that as computer dating, and how can you navigate being older and trying to find a relationship, but then also having the sister relationship. There are the Half the History, the Idali Cassell film that Jennifer helmed, that's about tap dancing and people.
Actually, Ursula and I co-directed that one.
Oh, I'm sorry, both of you did, of course, but I meant you helmed as a producer with from the idea, I was thinking. And then, and then there are a few other films in there. Ursula's got a couple more, and we treat them the same, about parenting and gender. So, even within the umbrella of our company and the ideas that we bring, it's all these different kinds of stories that are wanting to be told. And that within this little nutshell of a Zoom screen is showing just, here are 6 people, and we each have these really interesting stories that we're interested in telling. And then you think of that multiplied by all the different experiences, because 5 of us come from one family on this Zoom screen, and we have all these different ideas. You can just imagine how many stories there are, and the more space you make for that, the better it's going to be.
What is for you guys right now? What's the end game for all of you when it comes to this career path you guys have taken? Because I think if I recall correctly, Maria, when you first got into you intended wanting to go into Hollywood because you wanted to be making films, and I think you had mentioned before at the time that your father said you got to go to college first before you leave for LA, and him being from California as well too, if I remember correctly, is what you said. And that because he's familiar with the film world out there. But when you had gone out to LA and decided to pursue in making films, and I know you said you started working for Sundance, if I remember correctly, as one of your first gigs out there. Yeah. But as you started going through that, and this is a question for all of you, but I'm going to start with Maria first because this question that I wanted to ask all of you was because of her, because you wanted to you wanted to be in the filmmaking business, but was it primarily because you were just strictly passionate about it, or did you also have that perception of all the glitz and glamours that comes with it if you were to become successful? Was that part of the appeal as well too? And if so, once you went through the process, you realized that's not what it's all about. but I still love what I do. But at the end of the day, what is really the goal in mind? Do I want to do this because I love it, or am I going to make a film because I want to have the same effect on somebody else that watches the movies that I make as I did when I watched some of these other films that had inspired me to follow this career path? Like, I'm curious to see what your perspective is, and whoever else wants to take up after that.
Well, I'll tell you what is the same, even though for a different reason, is I would like to have more power to make the bigger budget films. Kind of what Ursula was talking about before, when we have to make compromises just simply for a lack of resources. And it's not that, every filmmaker, no matter how much money they have, I think always feels that they don't have enough resources. But we really have been forced to be very, very creative on a tiny, I think we've been much more, our projects look a lot better than you would ever guess from the small amount of resources we have to work with. And then when it comes to a project like Mercury 13 that I think Gabrielle alluded to before, we have this award-winning script. It just wins so many awards, and we're so proud of it. And I've lived with it so long. I see the movie in my head, and yet it needs a certain amount of money to be done right. And we've had offers where there just wouldn't be enough money, and it just some things you just can't compromise that way. And that's where I would like to be, at the level where I could have our stories financed in the way that we want to tell them. So, you just keep taking one step in front of the other and moving forward. But it's not about the glitz, like you said. It's more about having the clout when you go into the rooms of the people who can give you the green light to get to tell the bigger stories that we want to tell.
Interesting. Anyone else want to follow up with that?
Well,
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I came at this from a totally different, I thought I would make avant-garde theater for small audiences based on Japanese dance and clowning. I was really coming from left field. And I came on as a sister to work, and it was just a wonderful experience, and I kept going with the company. So I think we come at it from different places in terms of what we thought were going to be part of our visions. Anyway, that was where I first thought I might be.
I think that what's so interesting about this as a career is that it's one of those careers that you can do your whole life. Like, I don't think that there's a sense of you have to retire at any time. You don't have to stop. There's not people just keep working. And I think that that's really appealing to me. I think, back to what Jen said about, watching our mother as a writer, with her ups and downs. I think that, I don't know if I can speak for everybody, but I certainly came into it understanding that it wasn't going to be all glitz and glamour, that it was going to be a lot of work. And so what I find interesting is just figuring out ways to continue to tell stories, figuring out ways to continue to do it, and to sort of, how interests are shifting, or how, keeping up with different techniques or just digital things that are happening. I think that that's all super, super interesting. So I don't really see an end goal. I think the goal is more just to continue growing as an artist, as a person, constantly finding it. Hopefully I'll always find it interesting. And I don't see an end to that.
Yeah. And I would think of Dad's career, that he started as a musician, and then he became a professor and had a whole career there. And then he actually was an actor, as we said, from 70 to 90. And we actually did an audition from the ICU. He wanted to do an audition for, I think it was Curb Your Enthusiasm or something. The curtain behind him worked as a backdrop. And, we were like, okay, because he was going to get out of the ICU and he wanted to do this audition. And so I think that kind of modeling, of just like keep going, because as long as you want to, as long as it's fun and you're learning, as Ursula just said, like all the new kinds of ability. We all just had this wonderful experience. Gabrielle is directing a film about the Harmony Project in Ohio. And they have, as part of this project, they have a choir in a men's prison in Orient, Ohio. And we were able to come in and interview these incarcerated men who shared their stories in incredible ways. And because of that, we started out, we had 4 main people that we were going to feature, but so many people wanted to tell their stories that people, Ursula was going to be doing behind the scenes and Maria was doing some photography. We all pivoted and actually broke into 3 rooms and did primary photography so we could do all 50 interviews, right? So that kind of, just really, really drawing on your skills and doing hardcore cinematography.
And it was such a rich life experience. It is one of the things that I so value about being a filmmaker, that we could have that experience and share it together. And then Gabrielle's the director of it, but we're also invested in it now. We're really wanting to, like, we, as Jen's saying, we have all this footage now to sift through, and because we were in different rooms, we're curious what happened with the other rooms that we weren't in, because it was just this incredible, not just artistic experience, but life experience. Very profound to meet these people.
Right. And part of the story is also that this warden is a new leader and also the director of the whole Ohio prison, just sort of how she helped sort of start changing some of the culture and bringing in more of these groups that are about rehabilitation and art and all these things. It's just so many wonderful layers of story that we're learning about. So it's like having this ability to constantly sort of invest in areas that you want to learn more about, whether it's technical or stories or people's lives. I mean, that's just such an incredible gift. I'm so grateful to be able to have a life where all the time you can keep learning like that.
For me, I started in I thought I would be a kind of Laurie Anderson performer, so stage-based and storytelling. And then I got a Rotary scholarship right after college, and I'm super grateful to the Rotary clubs for that. And I went to France, and I was supposed to go to study cross-cultural literature and cultural identity between the French and the Americans, which was what I was working on as an undergrad. And so very intellectual sort of thing. And I just was tired of doing it. And I showed up to a photography school and said, could I study photography instead during this year? And they were like, oh, no, you cannot. You have no background. What do you think you are? And I said, s'il vous plaît. And they were like, why don't you go to your own, to the university where you already are? There's like a film school in there. You can like go to bother them. So then I went to that place, and they let me in, and it turned out 800 students apply each year and 29 get in after a week-long, 28 get in after a week-long exam that they've selected down from 800 to 100, and 28 of those get in. And I was the 29th, and I showed up and I was like, bonjour, je suis l'américaine, I'm the American here. And they all, had gone through fire together. And then I became part of that group. And I fell in love with filmmaking. The faculty was wonderful. And then came back. And then we, had this opportunity with Maria directing Just Friends. And you got it part of that. And that came on, we pulled our sort of creative resources slowly. And then it suddenly was like Temps, our second film, which I had written, came into being possible. And we formed the company. And it was, that kind of connected all of these things we were working on in different creative capacities and different passions personally. And it was like, hey, this really works together. And we, really like each other as colleagues. And so, let's keep doing it. So I think that was the path that, I didn't expect to take. And then a thing I've always been interested in is kind of community building and community organization of bringing people together who wouldn't necessarily otherwise have conversations. And film's a wonderful medium to do that.
Yeah, I agree.
So our films often have been used in that capacity, whether it's a comedy, you know, a traditional kind of comedy versus to a documentary film. Well, one thing that I love is bringing audiences into the room and then having those conversations. So we had that with you, obviously, with Manna From Heaven.
Yeah.
And then that with different films, they lend themselves to different ways of doing that. So we've had, you know, enormous numbers of community screenings and conversations with groups and, you know, even like religious, you know, churches, synagogues, et cetera, with our film Kings, Queens, and In-Betweens. And that's because that's one that brings people in to discuss the topic of gender and biology and sexuality and how those things relate or don't. And so that has been something which is really a passionate side as well of the art form, that it can be some way to, you get, you know, a lot of people in a room who are really interested in having a good time and being entertained by something. And you can also have a conversation about the content, and you can also meet each other after and, you know, share ideas or break bread together. And that breaks down some of the division or the isolation that can often occur. So that's really a wonderful part of it. I think, Charity, you also feel the same way about, you know, using the art form that way.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, I came in as a teacher. So I was an elementary school teacher. And for me, it was you know, growing up in a family that was very artistic. My mom a writer, my dad a musician and a professor, and always thinking about when we would go see movies, we would always think about the movies and often see them twice in a row to really talk about them and how they were made. And then, so for me, it was actually coming and being with my family and making something that would last, that has a good message. And I think that is an exciting thing and that we have continued to do. So we've all come from different ways, but we continue to grow together as artists. And one thing that I wanted to say before about the budget or not having the means to make a shot that we wanted to make, I think that pushed us to be artistic, to be the artist that we want to be, in figuring out, well, how can we tell this story if we don't have this other means to tell it? We have to figure out a way to get that point across, or to get that shot across that will be as powerful or even maybe more powerful than if we had that crane. So that was a thought.
I want the crane.
I want the crane.
We still want the
I
crane.
want the crane.
I genuinely was looking forward to this year to basically really pick up where we last left off, but it was just this is actually one of the rare times where I wouldn't say I was nervous, but I was just wondering how could I start off the conversation, because I've seen the amount of work you guys have done, and I have kept up with a bit of it throughout the years, but the thing is that I for some reason I had a hard time figuring out what could I start off by saying to you all about, apart from, you remember 20 years ago, and yeah, because I don't expect everyone to remember everything, but I was hoping that would be more or less the start off to the conversation, to then kind of ease our way through and then pick up from there, and hopefully, you know, we would get something out of it, which we obviously did here. But I genuinely want to say thank you to all of you guys, because this was something that I have thought about for many, many, many years, that I would hope that I get an opportunity to speak with you all. And you know, ever since I started working with this, with the channel NRW, me reaching out to various people and then having conversations with them, it has taught me a lot more about not just the process, but the amount of work that goes involved with filmmaking. Some are told in private, of course, but it gives me a better perspective about the overall industry and the overall individual, about what they go through, how they're going about it, and not look at one bad film as being the identity of the filmmakers, if you will. So there's a lot more that I've gained from this here, but I really want to speak with you all, because I felt like from my conversation with all of you, I took so many great things out of it that really had stayed with me throughout this entirety here. So it's a gift that you all have bestowed onto me that I've always cherished. And I'm so happy that I was able to talk to all of you in this very conversation. So if anything, I want to say thank you all very much again for giving me that time, considering your all's busy schedule here. I can't thank you enough because I really, really did enjoy our conversation here. So if you guys want to say something in closing, anything you want to point out here before we head on out, the floor is yours.
I just want to say, let's do this again before another 20 years.
19 years now.
Check in periodically.
Yeah.
I would love to have this again. Yeah.
That just is so, it just makes my heart warm to hear.
It's touching.
You talk about it. It's very touching. And I think you put things and you put them out in the world, you have conversations and you hope for exactly what you've been talking about. And it's been a lovely, lovely conversation.
Well, I appreciate you all taking the time here because I don't take this for granted. And I kind of a little left speechless right now because it was just one of those things that just wanted to happen. And I'm glad it did. And somehow, some way, it's that last conversation I had with all of you guys, it left me thinking so much. And this very conversation we just had now still left that same impact on me. So you guys still have the same effect the first time around, this time around here too. So thank you.
Well, to be continued. And thank you so much for having us.
All right. Well, until next time, you guys be safe out there. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to more of your upcoming projects when it comes down the pipeline here. So you guys stay safe out there.
You too.
Thanks.
So
You
much.
too. Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.